the cadaver that continued to gain weight. It sounds like something straight out of a Gothic horror novel or an eerie tale whispered in the dark corners of a forgotten cemetery. But in 1788, in the heart of Edinburgh, this bizarre phenomenon was more than just a chilling story. It was a true, documented case that defied the limits of human understanding. Imagine, if you will, a body, motionless and still, lying cold on a slab, its once warm flesh now stiff with rigor mortis. Yet, against all known laws of nature, this very body, long past the point of decay, began to expand. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, but steadily. What could cause this grotesque weight gain? How could a lifeless corpse break every rule of biology? The mystery begins in Edinburgh, a city teeming with scientific fervor, yet equally haunted by superstitions and a fascination with the macabre. In the late 18th century, Edinburgh was a centre of intellectual pursuit, a place where the old world of superstition collided with the dawning age of reason. The city's medical community was at the forefront of anatomical research, but it was also a time when the human body still held many dark, unexplored secrets. The cadavers that came under the scalpel were dissected for the purpose of advancing science, yet many of those very bodies seemed to resist the natural course of decay. In an age where medical science was still fledgling, it wasn't uncommon for doctors to perform post-mortem examinations in public, often with an air of dark curiosity and religious undertones. These dissection rooms were not sterile laboratories but places steeped in mystery, where the dead were laid bare for the living to study. It was a world where the boundary between life and death was often murky, where strange occurrences could easily slip through the cracks of reason. But what made this particular case so unsettling, so incomprehensible, was that this body didn't merely lie still, it seemed to resist the finality of death itself. As scientists and doctors prepared the body for examination, they noticed something strange. The cadaver began to increase in weight, slowly and unnaturally. At first, they assumed it was an issue of decomposition, a common occurrence during the process of putrefaction. Bodies often swell with gas as bacteria break down tissue. But this was different. The swelling didn't seem to follow the usual rules of decay. It wasn't a random process. This body, this lifeless vessel, was not only growing in size but also in weight, defying everything the doctors knew about biology, death, and the decomposition process. The news of the unusual cadaver quickly spread through the tight-knit medical community of Edinburgh. It wasn't long before those who had heard of the anomaly were eager to get a first-hand look. Word of mouth carried the tale through the city, and soon, scientists, doctors, and even laypeople began to whisper about the strange corpse that defied the natural order. Some believed it to be a sign of some unnatural force at work, while others were simply baffled. Was it a scientific anomaly, a freak occurrence that could be explained away with further research? Or was it something more? Perhaps, as some dark-minded individuals speculated, the body was cursed, touched by some supernatural power. In a society where death was still seen through a spiritual lens, the very idea of a body defying the rules of nature struck fear into the hearts of many. The 18th century was a time when belief in the supernatural still held sway over the rational mind. Ghost stories, hauntings, and tales of the undead were common. The idea that a dead body might not fully relinquish its hold on the world of the living wasn't as far-fetched as it might seem today. Even those who prided themselves on their rationality might have looked at this strange event with an uneasy glance, wondering if the mysterious corpse was a sign from the beyond. Could it be some vengeful spirit reaching out from the grave? Could the body be alive in some unknown way? For those who preferred a more scientific explanation, the mystery of the expanding body seemed to be just another puzzle to solve. After all, the human body was still an enigma in many ways. Medical science had made great strides in the preceding decades, anatomists had developed new methods of dissection, and advances in surgery were slowly transforming medicine from a practice of superstition to a more empirical science. But despite these advancements, the human body, once it passed into the realm of death, was still shrouded in mystery. Corpses could bloat, sometimes with alarming speed, as gases formed within the gut and intestines. These gases, produced by bacteria feeding on decaying tissue, were responsible for the infamous death bloat, the visible swelling of the body after death. But could this process explain the weight gain in this particular corpse? Could gas buildup be responsible for a body continuing to grow in weight, even as its tissues decomposed? The more the body was examined, the more the answers seemed to slip further away. The swelling of the body was not uniform. It was irregular, unpredictable. This wasn't just a case of gas buildup, it was something else entirely. The doctors who performed the examination found themselves stumped. How could a body continue to grow, not just in size but in weight? If it was gas, then why wasn't it escaping? How could the weight of a dead body increase, even as its internal organs began to decompose? The more questions they asked, the fewer answers they found. It seemed that the body had entered an unknown realm, one where the natural laws of decay and death no longer applied. Some suggested that the corpse might be suffering from some undiagnosed medical condition, perhaps a genetic anomaly, some rare disease that had not yet been identified. The idea of a living corpse, while still far-fetched, wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility. Could there have been some sort of metabolic activity continuing in the body, even after death? The mere suggestion of this was enough to make the hair on the back of the neck of anyone who heard it stand on end. But what if there was more to it than just scientific curiosity? What if this wasn't a medical case at all, but something far more sinister? As the days passed, the story of the expanding cadaver continued to unfold, each new detail adding to the growing sense of unease. What began as a simple case of post-mortem examination became an investigation into the boundaries of life and death, an examination of what we truly know about the body and what we don't. There was a sense of both awe and fear as the medical professionals tried, and failed, to make sense of what was happening. Some began to wonder if there were forces at play that could not be explained by science alone. But were these fears born from superstition, or was something truly beyond human understanding unfolding in front of their very eyes? This case, in many ways, was a mirror to the age in which it occurred, an age caught between old-world beliefs and the new dawn of scientific discovery. It reflected a world that was beginning to step away from the shadows of the unknown, but one that still had plenty of dark corners where the light had yet to reach. And perhaps, in those shadows, there was something more to the story of the cadaver that continued to gain weight. Something that was waiting to be uncovered, something that still baffles us to this day. Something that could change everything we thought we knew about the human body. In the end, this mystery may never be fully solved. Some cases remain locked in time, too elusive for science to fully grasp. But one thing is certain, the strange tale of the cadaver that continued to gain weight will remain etched in history, a symbol of the eerie, unexplained, and often terrifying mysteries that still lurk just beyond the reach of our understanding. Edinburgh in the late 18th century was a city of contrasts, teetering between the old world and the emerging new. It was a city caught between superstition and reason, between the ancient and the modern. The Enlightenment was in full swing, a period that saw the flourishing of reason, science, and intellectual discourse. Thinkers like David Hume, Adam Smith, and Robert Burns were reshaping the philosophical and cultural landscape, pushing the boundaries of what could be understood through rational thought. Yet, beneath this intellectual wave, the old beliefs still held sway. The supernatural and the macabre had a powerful grip on the people, and death, mysterious, ominous, and often misunderstood, was a subject that sparked both curiosity and fear. At the time, Edinburgh was a centre for medical research, though its practices were far from the sophisticated, sanitized science we know today. The study of anatomy and dissection was still in its infancy, and many of the medical procedures carried out at the time would seem barbaric by today's standards. Yet, this was a period of rapid transformation in the field of medicine. Surgeons and doctors were eager to push the limits of what was known about the human body. The dissection of human cadavers had become a vital part of medical education, but obtaining bodies for these dissections was not always easy. Many bodies came from the graveyards, often the result of public executions or from the resurrection men, individuals who dug up freshly buried corpses to sell to medical schools. Bodies were the currency of this dark trade, and with them came a macabre fascination with death and decay. In the backdrop of this growing interest in human anatomy, there was a rising curiosity in death itself. The human body was seen as a vessel, a mystery to be unraveled. Death was still a largely misunderstood process, both spiritually and scientifically. Medicine in the 18th century, while making great strides, still lacked the tools to fully understand what happened after a person passed away. Concepts like the rigor mortis cycle, the stages of decomposition, and the idea of putrefaction were all in their infancy. The science of death had not yet advanced to the level where it could explain all the strange, unexplainable phenomena that came with it. In this climate of intellectual fervor, the city of Edinburgh became a hub of medical exploration, yet it was also a city deeply entrenched in older, more superstitious beliefs. Folk tales of ghosts, spirits, and witches were still alive in the popular imagination. It was a time when both the scientific and the supernatural coexisted uneasily, often overlapping in the minds of the people. Doctors and philosophers were attempting to demystify death, but the average person still saw it as a transition into the unknown, a doorway to another world, where the rules of nature might not always apply. The people of Edinburgh, particularly those involved in the medical and scientific communities, had begun to push the boundaries of what could be known about life and death. Dissection, the cutting open of the human body to study its organs, was still a controversial practice, especially for those who held strong religious beliefs. It was seen by many as a defilement of the sacredness of the human body, a form of desecration. And yet, it was also seen as a necessary step in the advancement of science. The dissection of the human body allowed doctors to explore the inner workings of organs, muscles, and bones, an invaluable tool for understanding human health. At the same time, though, there were many gaps in their knowledge. The human body was still a mystery in many respects, and its behavior after death was something that was little understood. What happened after the heart stopped beating? What caused a body to bloat or discolor? Was there a lingering essence, some force that kept the body intact long after life had departed? Questions like these hovered in the minds of those studying anatomy, but for all their progress, many of the answers remained elusive. As medicine struggled to answer these questions, the city of Edinburgh was also home to a thriving undercurrent of mysticism and dark curiosity. It was a time when ghosts and spirits were believed to linger, especially around the areas of death and burial. The graveyards of Edinburgh were known for being particularly haunted, and stories of the dead returning to life were not uncommon. These stories were often whispered in the dark corners of taverns and marketplaces, where the living spoke of the uncanny, of strange sights and eerie encounters with the deceased. This belief in the supernatural was, of course, a remnant of older times when death was not merely a biological event but a spiritual one. It was a time when the veil between the living and the dead was thought to be thin, and the dead could return to the world of the living, either as ghosts or through other mysterious means. The clash between the emerging scientific rationalism of the Enlightenment and these older beliefs created a unique atmosphere in Edinburgh. The very people who were pushing the boundaries of medical knowledge were simultaneously confronting and being influenced by the lingering shadows of superstition. It was this tension, between the old and the new, that formed the backdrop for the strange and unsettling case that would later come to haunt the city's medical community. When the mysterious body began to gain weight post-mortem, it seemed to be a direct challenge to everything the doctors thought they knew about death and decomposition. The medical community, which prided itself on its rationality and scientific approach, found itself stumped by a phenomenon that didn't fit into any of the accepted categories of death and decay. How could a dead body continue to gain weight? What could cause this? It was an anomaly that seemed to fall outside the realm of scientific understanding, and it left those who examined the body grappling with questions they had no answers to. The story of the cadaver that gained weight was not just a medical mystery, but a reflection of the broader uncertainties of the time. It highlighted the limits of human knowledge and the ways in which the unexplained could slip through the cracks of rationality. It was an unsettling reminder that there were still forces at play in the natural world that humans had yet to comprehend, and perhaps never would. For the doctors in Edinburgh, this body was a challenge, one that shook their faith in the very foundations of their discipline. For the people of the city, it was a harbinger of something darker, something that lay beyond the reach of both science and superstition. Edinburgh, in this era, was a city straddling the line between these two worlds, the world of the known and the unknown. As the Enlightenment spread across Europe, science promised to unravel the mysteries of life and death. But in the streets of Edinburgh, the shadows of ancient beliefs still lingered. The medical professionals, for all their education and reason, could not escape the unsettling sense that something far beyond their understanding was unfolding. The mystery of the cadaver that continued to gain weight was just one example of how, even in the age of reason, the supernatural, the unexplained, and the macabre still had the power to grip the human imagination. It was a time of curiosity, yes, but also of fear, a fear of the unknown that could not be entirely explained away by science. For all their breakthroughs, the doctors of Edinburgh were left to wonder, what if some things were simply beyond human comprehension? What if the mysteries of death, of the body, were not meant to be fully understood? In the end, the case of the expanding cadaver left a lingering question in the air, one that would resonate through the centuries. What happens when science and superstition collide? What happens when the rational world is confronted with a mystery it cannot explain? In the streets and lecture halls of Edinburgh, these questions would continue to haunt those who sought to unlock the secrets of life, death, and everything that lies in between. The discovery of the cadaver that began to gain weight post-mortem is a tale of chilling unease that sent ripples through the medical community in Edinburgh in 1788. It was a time when death and the human body were still shrouded in mystery, and it was precisely this ambiguity that allowed the strange occurrence to take root and stir the deepest fears in those who came into contact with it. The story of this body began, as many tales of horror do, with something as ordinary as a death. But this was no ordinary death, and the aftermath was far from anything the medical professionals in Edinburgh could have anticipated. At first glance, the body appeared to be just another subject for dissection. The man had died, and his body had been procured for the purpose of anatomical study, which was a common practice at the time. It was a normal procedure, routine even. The man, who had passed away from what was likely an illness or injury, was brought to one of Edinburgh's many dissection rooms, where the bodies of the dead were studied by surgeons and medical students eager to learn more about the workings of the human body. For the doctors, the body was merely a vessel, a means to further their understanding of anatomy, a tool in the growing science of medicine. But this particular cadaver soon presented an anomaly that was impossible to ignore. The first signs of something being wrong came soon after the body was laid out on the dissection table. The doctors, who had likely seen dozens, if not hundreds, of bodies in their careers, began to notice something that didn't belong, something that didn't fit into their understanding of the process of death and decay. The body wasn't behaving as it should. The first oddity was the body's increasing weight. A dead body, in its natural course, begins to decompose almost immediately after death. Gases build up in the abdomen, the organs begin to break down, and the body begins to swell. This is a natural, albeit disturbing, process. Yet the swelling in this particular case wasn't following the usual course of decomposition. Instead of the body's organs breaking down and gases escaping, the body seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. The weight gain was gradual, and at first, the doctors thought it might be a natural part of decomposition. Perhaps it was an oddity, a strange quirk of nature that they had never seen before. But as the swelling continued, it became clear that this wasn't a typical case. As the body continued to gain weight, it became impossible for the doctors to ignore the unusual phenomenon. They began to examine the body more closely, trying to understand what could be causing this strange, almost unnatural, process. Was it a disease? Could some undiagnosed condition be causing the body to retain fluids or gases in an unusual way? Perhaps the corpse was suffering from an infection that was still affecting it, even after death. But there were no signs of any such condition. The body was, in many ways, perfectly preserved, aside from the abnormal weight gain. As the examination continued, the doctors began to speculate. One theory suggested that the body's weight gain could be due to the buildup of gases. After death, the natural process of decomposition causes gases to form in the body's intestines and stomach. These gases are responsible for the bloating that is often seen in a corpse after death. But this theory didn't fully explain the phenomenon at hand. The weight of the body wasn't just from gas buildup. It was as if the body was somehow absorbing something, retaining it in a way that no corpse should. The gases didn't seem to be dissipating as they should have. There was something about this body's behavior that simply didn't match any known pattern of decomposition. As the days passed, the body's continued growth in weight began to baffle those involved in the dissection. With each new observation, the mystery deepened. The body's abnormality could no longer be dismissed as a simple case of irregular decomposition. There had to be another explanation. The cadaver had become an enigma, a puzzle that refused to be solved. Some of the doctors began to speculate that the body's weight gain could be due to the presence of some kind of internal fluid or substance that was not typically found in a deceased body. Could the corpse be absorbing something from the air or environment that was causing it to swell? Was there some unknown chemical or biological process at work? But these theories were mere guesses. No one had any concrete answers. The more the doctors examined the body, the more questions arose. As the examination continued, rumors began to spread. The more doctors and scientists who came to see the body, the more nervous and fearful they became. Was this some kind of medical anomaly? Or was there something more sinister at play? There were whispers of supernatural causes. Could the body have been cursed? Was there some otherworldly force at work? Some believed that the expanding corpse was a sign of a divine intervention or a curse, something that defied all human understanding. Others were less inclined to accept such supernatural explanations, but the growing mystery of the body was undeniably unsettling. Despite the theories and speculation, no one was able to definitively explain what was happening. The mystery deepened with every passing day. No amount of scientific inquiry seemed to bring any answers. The cadaver's behavior was entirely unexplainable, and it seemed to be defying the very laws of biology. What had begun as a simple dissection had become a disturbing, terrifying investigation that challenged everything the doctors thought they knew about death and decay. The cadaver's weight gain didn't stop with the initial swelling. It continued, steadily increasing as days turned into weeks. The body, which had once been nothing more than a lifeless form, had become a terrifying anomaly that seemed to exist outside of the normal rules of life and death. No one knew what to make of it. The growing weight of the body was both fascinating and horrifying, a strange mix of intellectual curiosity and primal fear. The doctors who had been involved in the dissection had been trained to face the mysteries of death with reason and rationality, but this case was unlike anything they had ever encountered. And so, as the days passed and the body continued to gain weight, the case of the expanding cadaver became a subject of intense debate and speculation. Some doctors began to question their own understanding of the human body. If a dead body could do this, if it could break the rules of nature, then what other mysteries remained hidden from the world of science? What other forces, unknown to modern medicine, might be at play? The medical professionals in Edinburgh, who had once believed that they had a handle on the mechanics of death, found themselves confronted with a mystery that seemed to have no explanation. The body's strange behavior continued to confound all attempts at understanding. Each theory, each explanation, only led to more questions. The cadaver had become a symbol of the limits of human knowledge, a reminder that, for all the advances made in science, there were still forces at play in the world that defied explanation. And as the weight of the body grew, so did the sense of unease that accompanied it. The expanding corpse had become a puzzle, a dark riddle that would remain unsolved for years to come. As the mystery of the cadaver that continued to gain weight unraveled further, the medical community in Edinburgh found itself grappling with a profound challenge. The body, which had begun to swell unnaturally, seemed to defy all known principles of decomposition. The early theories put forth by the doctors who examined it varied, but none seemed to provide a satisfactory explanation for what was happening. Was it a strange disease, something previously unknown to medicine? Or was it merely a bizarre, yet natural, oddity that science had yet to understand? Each possibility seemed to open new questions, and as each hypothesis was explored, more evidence seemed to contradict it. At first, the doctors involved in the dissection leaned toward the idea that the body's weight gain was due to the natural process of decomposition. After death, as gases build up inside the body, it's not uncommon for a corpse to swell. This is part of what is known as putrefaction, the process by which bacteria break down tissues in the absence of oxygen. As bacteria decompose the body, gases such as methane, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide are released. These gases, trapped inside the body, can cause it to bloat and expand, often to alarming degrees. This was a process well understood by the time of the cadaver's discovery in 1788, and so it seemed like a logical explanation for the increasing weight. Perhaps the gases had not been escaping from the body as they should, or perhaps the body had reacted in an unusual way to the normal process of decay. It made sense, in theory, that this could explain the strange phenomena at first. However, as the days passed, the weight of the body continued to increase, far beyond what was typical for post-mortem swelling. The buildup of gases didn't seem to follow any expected patterns, and the swelling was not uniform. The more the body was examined, the more it became apparent that something else was at work. It wasn't simply the gases. Something else was causing the body to continue to gain mass, and the doctors were no closer to understanding what that could be. They began to ask whether this could be a sign of something that had never been seen before in the medical world, perhaps a new disease or condition that was affecting the body's decomposition process. One theory put forward by some doctors was that the cadaver might be suffering from an internal infection that was still active post-mortem. This idea was based on the understanding that after death, bacteria continued to proliferate in the body, feeding on the tissues and organs. However, even this theory seemed flawed in the context of the growing mystery. The body had been examined carefully, and no visible signs of infection were found. If the body was infected, why wasn't there any sign of it in the tissues? Why wasn't the infection spreading or exhibiting typical symptoms, such as fever or inflammation? This theory didn't seem to explain why the body was continuing to gain weight in such a specific manner. It raised more questions than answers. Another theory suggested that the weight gain could be due to some kind of metabolic activity continuing even after death. There were occasional reports of bodies displaying strange behavior after death, such as muscles twitching or even limbs moving involuntarily. Could the cadaver be experiencing some kind of abnormal metabolic process that caused it to absorb fluids, retain gases, or take in some external substance that caused the weight to increase? This suggestion seemed even more far-fetched, and while some were willing to entertain the idea, it was clear that this was not something that had ever been observed in other cases. The laws of biology as they understood them simply did not allow for the possibility of continued metabolic activity after death. Once the body stopped breathing, the chemical and biological processes that sustain life ceased as well. And yet, this body seemed to be defying those very rules. As the examination continued, more theories were proposed, but none seemed to capture the full picture. Some doctors began to consider the possibility that the body might have been exposed to some rare environmental condition that had caused the unusual weight gain. Perhaps it had been buried too deeply, where the body had absorbed strange substances from the soil, or maybe it had been exposed to a unique form of bacteria or gas that caused it to behave differently than other corpses. But no matter how many possible explanations were suggested, none seemed to fully account for the evidence at hand. There were even whispers among the more superstitious members of the community that the body's behavior could be the result of something supernatural. Some suggested that the cadaver might have been cursed, or that it had been affected by some kind of malevolent spirit. Such ideas, though not entirely uncommon at the time, seemed ludicrous to most of the medical professionals involved in the case. Yet, there was something about the body's strange behavior that felt unnatural, and it was easy to understand why some might look to the supernatural for an explanation. Despite all the theories and conjecture, the cadaver's behavior remained an unsolved mystery. The body continued to gain weight, and the doctors were left with little more than speculation. None of the explanations they proposed seemed to fit the facts. It was as if they were confronting a riddle with no solution, a puzzle that was outside the bounds of their understanding. The case had begun as a simple dissection, yet it had grown into something much more unsettling. The mystery surrounding the body only deepened as more doctors and medical experts were called in to examine the corpse. As each new examination was conducted, it became more apparent that no one had any real answers. This lack of explanation caused widespread anxiety among the medical community. The doctors who had been involved in the dissection, many of whom were experienced professionals, found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the human body. It was a profound crisis of confidence, one that made them reconsider the very limits of their scientific knowledge. They had been trained to understand the mechanisms of life and death, to apply logic and reason to every case they encountered. But this case seemed to defy all that training, as if the body itself was mocking their attempts to understand it. The cadaver's continued weight gain became a symbol of the limits of human knowledge. It was a reminder that, for all the advancements in science and medicine, there were still mysteries that could not be explained. The body seemed to stand as a testament to the fact that some things were simply beyond understanding. For the doctors involved, the case became a dark reminder of how fragile their confidence in science could be. It wasn't just a single unexplained event, it was an indictment of the limitations of human knowledge itself. This sense of helplessness was compounded by the fact that the body's weight gain was not just an intellectual puzzle, it was also deeply unsettling. The idea of a dead body continuing to change, continuing to gain weight, was something that disturbed the very core of what it meant to be alive. The cadaver seemed to be locked in some kind of grotesque stasis, neither fully dead nor fully alive. It was as if the body itself was trapped between two worlds, a realm where the laws of nature no longer applied. The doctors involved in the dissection were not the only ones who were disturbed by the phenomenon. As word spread throughout Edinburgh, the public began to take notice. People in the city began to whisper about the expanding corpse, and soon the tale of the strange cadaver had become a kind of urban legend. Some people came to the dissection rooms to see the body for themselves, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread. The mysterious nature of the case captured the imagination of the public in a way that few scientific events could. But for the medical professionals involved, the case was not just an oddity or a spectacle, it was a crisis. It called into question everything they thought they knew about the human body, about life and death, and about the natural order of things. The cadaver's weight gain was not simply an anomaly, it was a profound challenge to the very foundations of medical science. And as the mystery deepened, the doctors involved were left with one uncomfortable truth. Some things, no matter how hard we try, will never be fully understood. In the quest to understand the anomaly of the expanding cadaver, the medical community found itself drawn into a deeper investigation of the very processes that govern life and death. At the time, The study of the human body, particularly its decomposition, was still a field of great uncertainty. While there had been some advancements in medical science, particularly in anatomy and surgery, much about the body's post-mortem processes remained a mystery. The strange case of the cadaver that gained weight after death highlighted just how little was understood about the body's natural decline. The investigation into this phenomenon would require a thorough understanding of decomposition and the processes that occur once a body begins its inevitable march toward decay. Decomposition itself is a complex and multi-stage process. Once a person dies, their body begins to break down through several stages, each of which is governed by a series of biological and chemical reactions. The first stage of decomposition begins immediately after death, with the cessation of metabolic processes. The body is no longer able to circulate oxygen, and as a result, cells begin to break down. Without oxygen, the cells are unable to continue performing their normal functions, leading to a process known as autolysis. Autolysis is the self-digestion of the body cells, caused by the enzymes contained within the cells themselves. These enzymes begin to break down the tissues, starting with the soft tissues, such as the liver, heart, and muscles. This process of autolysis is typically followed by the second stage of decomposition, putrefaction. Putrefaction is the breakdown of the body's organic matter, largely driven by bacteria. Bacteria, which are already present in the intestines, begin to spread throughout the body, further accelerating the process of decay. As the bacteria consume the decaying tissues, they produce gases such as methane, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide. These gases accumulate in the body, causing the abdomen to swell. The buildup of these gases is one of the most noticeable signs of decomposition, and the resulting bloating can cause a body to double in size in a relatively short period. Under normal circumstances, this bloating is part of the natural decomposition process, and it typically occurs within days of death. The gases produced during putrefaction exert pressure on the internal organs and tissues, forcing them to expand. This is a process that can be observed in many bodies after death, especially when they are exposed to high temperatures or when the body has not been properly embalmed. The bloating and the accompanying smell are characteristic of decomposition, and they are part of what most people think of when they imagine a body in decay. However, the case of the cadaver that continued to gain weight after death did not conform to these familiar patterns. While the early stages of decomposition followed a relatively predictable course, this particular body seemed to defy the expected trajectory. The body's continued weight gain, beyond the normal swelling associated with putrefaction, raised immediate questions. What could cause the body to gain weight even as the internal organs were breaking down? Why did the gases remain trapped inside the body without dissipating as they should? These were questions that the medical professionals at the time could not answer, and they were questions that made them reconsider their understanding of the very science of death. One of the most perplexing aspects of the expanding cadaver was that the bloating didn't seem to follow the typical pattern of decomposition. While the buildup of gases in a corpse is a common and expected phenomenon, the weight gain in this particular body was not caused by the usual gas buildup in the digestive tract. The swelling was not limited to the abdomen or internal organs, as would typically be the case. Instead, the entire body seemed to be affected, and it wasn't just the soft tissues that appeared to be expanding. Even the muscles and bones of the cadaver seemed to be affected by this strange force. The weight of the body increased steadily and consistently, defying the usual timeline and expectations for post-mortem decay. In fact, the swelling appeared to be so severe that it raised concerns among the doctors examining the body. How could a body continue to expand after death, beyond the natural processes of decomposition? Could this be something more than just an unusual case of bloating? Could it be the result of a previously unknown disease or condition? In an attempt to explain the abnormal weight gain, some doctors considered the possibility that the body might be absorbing external substances, such as water, from the surrounding environment. Could the body have been exposed to unusual environmental conditions that were causing it to retain more fluids than usual? This theory seemed unlikely, as the body had not been buried or exposed to any unusual conditions that might explain such an absorption of fluids. Still, the notion that something in the environment could be affecting the body was tempting, but ultimately unproven. Another explanation that was suggested was that the body's condition was the result of some kind of metabolic activity still occurring after death. While this idea was rooted in the understanding that certain bodily functions continue briefly after death, particularly the movement of muscles and the contraction of certain tissues, it still did not explain why the body would continue to gain weight in such an abnormal way. Once a person dies, their metabolic processes cease, and the body should begin its slow decline. There should be no further intake of fluids or gases, and certainly no gain in weight. Yet the cadaver in question seemed to be doing just that. At this point, some of the more superstitious members of the medical community began to entertain the possibility that the body's abnormal behavior could have been caused by some sort of supernatural force. While most doctors would have dismissed such notions outright, the sheer unpredictability of the body swelling led some to question whether there was something outside the realm of known biology at play. Could this body have been cursed? Could some kind of spiritual force or dark magic have caused it to behave in such an unnatural way? This idea, though dismissed by the majority of the medical professionals, would not have been out of place in the broader cultural context of 18th century Edinburgh, where belief in ghosts, spirits, and supernatural forces still held sway over many aspects of life. Despite these more outlandish theories, the doctors examining the body remained focused on finding a more rational explanation. The body's behavior was simply too perplexing to dismiss as a mere curiosity. If it was not the result of an unusual disease or infection, then what could account for the bizarre phenomenon? The more the body was studied, the more it became apparent that it did not fit into any known category of disease or decomposition. It was as if the body had entered into a state that was beyond the understanding of those who studied it. At the time, the concept of mystery diseases was well known, but even the most infamous of these, such as the so-called consumption or tuberculosis, did not present symptoms as strange as this. This cadaver seemed to be suffering from a condition that was not just rare, but completely unknown. The very fact that it continued to gain weight after death suggested that there was still something happening within the body, something that science had yet to discover. As the investigation into the expanding cadaver continued, the physicians and medical students involved were forced to confront the limits of their understanding. The mystery of the body's swelling challenged everything they thought they knew about death, decomposition, and the human body. The case became a reminder that, for all the advancements in medical science, there were still forces at work in the natural world that could not be easily explained. Even as the scientific community made great strides in understanding the body, it was clear that there were still many mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Ultimately, the cadaver's strange weight gain remained an unsolved mystery. The doctors were unable to provide a definitive answer to the question of what had caused the body to behave in such an unusual way. Some of them may have left the case with a sense of frustration, while others might have been left with a lingering sense of or at the vast unknown that still existed in the world of science. Whatever the case, the expanding cadaver was a powerful reminder that, no matter how much we know, there will always be things beyond our understanding, things that will continue to challenge even the most rational minds. And in the dark corners of medicine, where the body lies still and lifeless, there will always be the possibility of encountering the unknown. As the case of the expanding cadaver continued to puzzle the medical community in Edinburgh, a critical turning point came when the story of the mysterious body began to spread beyond the confines of the medical examination rooms. What had started as a dissection intended to further medical knowledge had now become something far more unsettling, a mystery that defied not only the laws of nature but also the very boundaries of scientific reason. The tale of the cadaver that continued to gain weight began to attract attention from a wider audience, both from the public and from other medical experts. But what truly set the case apart was not just the body's unusual behavior, but how it became a symbol of the struggle between the rational and the irrational, between science and superstition. Edinburgh was, at the time, a city deeply influenced by both the Enlightenment and traditional beliefs. The city had long been a hub for intellectual pursuit, where thinkers and scientists were making revolutionary strides in understanding the world around them. The Enlightenment had ushered in a new era of reason, where scientific inquiry was at the forefront of cultural life. Yet, at the same time, Edinburgh was also steeped in centuries-old superstitions, many of which still shaped the way its people viewed the world. It was a time when, even in the heart of scientific progress, belief in the supernatural still thrived, and ghosts, witches, and curses were very much a part of everyday life. For the medical professionals involved in the case, this collision of reason and superstition posed a unique challenge. They were trained to look at the body from a purely rational perspective, to dissect and analyze it using the tools of modern science. And yet, with the strange case of the expanding cadaver, they found themselves confronting something that seemed beyond their understanding, something that defied the very principles they had been taught. They knew that the body was not behaving as it should. No one could deny that, but the cause of its unnatural weight gain was elusive. Theories abounded, but none could fully explain the mystery. And, as the body's strange transformation continued, some of the doctors began to look at the situation through a different lens. Could there be something more to this case than just a scientific anomaly? Could there be something supernatural at work? At this point, it's important to understand the social and cultural context of 18th century Edinburgh. The city was undergoing a dramatic transformation, caught between the old world of superstition and the new world of science and reason. It was a time when belief in the supernatural still had a strong hold on the public imagination, and many people turned to spiritual explanations for the mysteries of life and death. Ghosts were believed to haunt the graveyards, and tales of the undead and revenants were common. The very idea of a body that refused to decay properly or that continued to gain weight after death played into these fears. For some, the case was a sign of something deeply unnatural, a harbinger of something beyond the material world. This clash between rationalism and superstition created a fertile ground for rumors to spread. People began to whisper about the cadaver's mysterious behavior, and soon the tale took on a life of its own. The body was no longer just a medical curiosity, it became a symbol of something much darker, something that defied the natural order. It was said that the body had been cursed, that it was the victim of some kind of malevolent force. Some even claimed that the body had been animated by dark magic or that it was a sign of some impending doom. These theories, though not supported by any evidence, found their way into the public discourse. They tapped into a deep-seated fear of the unknown, a fear that still pervaded much of society at the time. For the medical professionals involved, the idea that the body could be cursed or influenced by supernatural forces was deeply unsettling. These were men of reason, trained to dissect the mysteries of the human body and explain them in terms of biology and chemistry. But the more they studied the expanding cadaver, the more it seemed to elude their understanding. Could there truly be a spiritual explanation for what they were witnessing? Could the supernatural be responsible for this anomaly? This question, though rarely voiced in the medical examination rooms, lingered in the minds of those who observed the body's strange behavior. However, as the case progressed, the medical professionals continued to search for a rational explanation. They ruled out infection, metabolic activity, and other common causes of post-mortem changes. With each new observation, the mystery deepened. It was clear that something extraordinary was happening, but the cause remained elusive. The doctors found themselves caught in a dilemma. They had been trained to believe in the power of reason and evidence, but this case was refusing to be solved through logic alone. As they struggled to make sense of the body's strange condition, they found themselves at an intellectual impasse. It was around this time that some of the more superstitious members of the public began to take notice of the cadaver. Rumors about the expanding body spread quickly throughout Edinburgh, and soon it became the subject of much speculation. People from all walks of life were drawn to the mystery, eager to see the body for themselves. The dissection rooms became a kind of public spectacle, with curious onlookers gathering to witness the phenomenon firsthand. For many, the cadaver represented something much more than just a medical mystery. It was a symbol of the unknown, of the forces that lay beyond human understanding. And for some, it was a sign that death itself had not yet yielded all its secrets. The case became a focal point for the growing tension between scientific inquiry and the supernatural. As the body's strange behavior continued, some members of the public began to interpret the phenomenon in spiritual terms. It was said that the body's weight gain was a sign of the presence of an otherworldly force, a reminder that the natural world was not as easily understood as science might suggest. In the minds of these individuals, the expanding cadaver was more than just an anatomical puzzle. It was a manifestation of something dark and unknowable. The more the body gained weight, the more it seemed to embody the unknowable forces that lay just beyond the reach of science. This belief in the supernatural was not unique to Edinburgh. Throughout history, many cultures have looked to death as a threshold between the material and the spiritual world. In some cultures, the dead were believed to retain some form of power or presence after death, whether through lingering spirits or through supernatural phenomena. The idea that a dead body could continue to change or that it could be influenced by forces beyond the natural world was not new. It had existed in various forms throughout human history. In the context of 18th century Edinburgh, where science and superstition coexisted uneasily, the expanding cadaver became a focal point for these ancient beliefs. As the investigation into the body's strange condition continued, the medical professionals found themselves confronting a difficult question. Should they continue to approach the case purely through the lens of science, or should they entertain the possibility that there was something beyond the natural world at play? For some, this question would remain unanswered. Despite the best efforts of the doctors, the case of the expanding cadaver remained a mystery, an enigma that refused to be solved by reason alone. In the end, the case of the expanding cadaver became more than just a scientific puzzle. It became a symbol of the limits of human knowledge. It was a stark reminder that, no matter how much we learn, there will always be things beyond our understanding. The mystery of the body's weight gain revealed the boundaries of science and reason, and it highlighted the complex relationship between the known and the unknown. As the case unfolded, it raised larger questions about the nature of death itself and the forces that govern it. Could death be fully understood? Or was it, as the expanding cadaver seemed to suggest, a realm that lay beyond the reach of even the most advanced scientific minds? For the doctors involved, the case left an indelible mark. It forced them to confront the limits of their knowledge and the possibility that some mysteries were simply beyond explanation. And for the people of Edinburgh, the story of the expanding cadaver became a reminder that the world was full of wonders and terrors that could not always be understood, no matter how hard one tried. It was a mystery that would remain unsolved, a dark and enigmatic chapter in the history of medicine that would continue to fascinate and disturb for generations to come. The mystery of the cadaver that continued to gain weight after death did not fade from the public's mind after the initial investigations. Instead, it continued to simmer beneath the surface of Edinburgh's medical and cultural discourse. The strange body had become a symbol of something far beyond mere academic curiosity. It had evolved from a scientific enigma into a cultural phenomenon, a story whispered in the streets, in taverns, and in the drawing rooms of Edinburgh's intellectual elite. People from all walks of life found themselves captivated by the strange case, each offering their own theories, often blending fact with superstition. But as the phenomenon persisted, the larger questions about the nature of life, death, and decay grew more pressing. How did death truly work? Could the body, once life had left it, continue to behave in such an inexplicable way? These questions went beyond the individual case and struck at the heart of the human understanding of mortality. As the case continued to be discussed, medical professionals who had once approached the body as a simple dissection subject were now confronting a deeper, more philosophical dilemma. The expanding cadaver, though ostensibly a biological issue, had taken on an existential dimension. To the doctors who had spent their lives studying the human body, the sight of this unexplainable post-mortem condition represented a profound challenge to the very principles of science they held dear. It was as if the body had become a symbol of something more significant, something that lay beyond the reach of human understanding. In a sense, the cadaver had transformed from a physical entity into a metaphor for the unknown. What if the body itself held secrets about death that modern science could not unlock? What if there were aspects of death that were so foreign to human experience that no amount of observation could ever truly reveal them? In the years that followed, the case of the expanding cadaver would continue to be referenced in medical and philosophical circles. While some would dismiss it as nothing more than a curiosity, an anomalous event that had no real bearing on the broader understanding of death, others saw it as a critical moment in the ongoing struggle to understand the final frontier of human existence. The truth was, the expanding cadaver was not simply an oddity. It was a manifestation of the limitations of scientific knowledge. For centuries, death had been a mystery, something that was both inevitable and unknowable. Even as science advanced, there were still aspects of death that eluded understanding. The expanding cadaver, which resisted all attempts at explanation, was a reminder that death itself could still surprise even the most seasoned medical professionals. The investigation into the cadaver's behavior was not conducted in isolation. It took place within the broader context of a rapidly changing world, where science was becoming increasingly dominant. In the late 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment had fostered an intellectual climate that emphasized reason, observation, and the systematic pursuit of knowledge. Medicine, once guided by superstitions and religious dogma, had begun to be understood as a field based on empirical evidence and scientific principles. This new approach to science, driven by figures such as Edward Jenner, William Hunter, and John Hunter, was slowly transforming how the human body was understood. However, the case of the expanding cadaver demonstrated that, for all the advances made in understanding the human body, there were still mysteries that could not be explained away with simple scientific inquiry. One aspect of the growing intrigue surrounding the case was the way in which the phenomenon began to interact with broader cultural beliefs about death and the afterlife. In Edinburgh, death was something that was constantly present in people's lives, whether through personal experience or through the public execution of criminals, which was still a common occurrence at the time. The cadaver that continued to gain weight began to tap into the deep-seated fears and uncertainties that death provoked. People were already uncomfortable with the idea of the body's decomposition, the physical evidence of mortality, and the notion that this particular body continued to change, even after death, pushed the boundaries of what the public could accept. At the same time, the growing fascination with the case of the expanding cadaver was fueled by the sense that death itself could be a form of power. In some quarters, death was not just an ending but a transformative process, one that carried with it hidden knowledge or unexplainable forces. Could the body, after it had crossed the threshold into death, still contain some latent force or power that modern science could not perceive? The belief that death was not a finality, but rather a doorway to something beyond human comprehension, was a deeply ingrained part of the cultural consciousness. For many, the idea that the body could exhibit unnatural behavior after death spoke to the notion that there were still forces at play beyond the understanding of the living. It was a reminder that death did not end all things. Rather, it might be a prelude to a different kind of existence. The case also highlighted a tension within the medical community. As the expanding cadaver continued to perplex doctors, some began to question their own faith in the scientific method. For centuries, medicine had operated under the assumption that the body, once dead, was a predictable system. Death was a known entity. It was final, it was inevitable, and it was governed by the laws of biology. But the strange case in Edinburgh seemed to suggest that there were forces at play that science could not explain. It was as though the very rules of life and death had been upended, and this created an existential crisis for some members of the medical profession. How could a science built on reason and evidence explain something that appeared to fall outside the realm of reason? While some were deeply troubled by the implications of the expanding cadaver, others looked at the case as an opportunity. The mystery that had arisen from the body's behavior presented a unique challenge for the growing field of medicine. Could it be that this was an anomaly that could lead to new discoveries in the realm of biology or death? Could the case of the expanding cadaver offer a clue that would help unlock the mysteries of decomposition, or even lead to a new understanding of life and death itself? In some ways, the very fact that the cadaver seemed to defy all known explanations made it an object of fascination. It was as if the body, by virtue of its strange behavior, had become a portal into the unknown, a chance for doctors to expand their understanding of the mysteries of the human form. Despite the challenges it posed to the medical community, the case of the expanding cadaver also served as a reminder that science was, and would always be, a work in progress. There were limits to human knowledge, and the unknowns of the human body remained as vast as ever. The mystery that surrounded the cadaver was not just an isolated event, it was part of the broader journey of discovery that had always characterized science. Even the most perplexing anomalies could be used as stepping stones toward greater understanding. In this sense, the case of the expanding cadaver became a kind of touchstone for future generations of scientists. It would remain a puzzle to be solved, but it would also serve as a reminder of the journey that lay ahead. The continuing mystery of the cadaver resonated in a time when the lines between science and superstition were often blurred. Although rational thinking was becoming more widespread, deeply ingrained beliefs about the afterlife and the supernatural still held sway over many people. The idea that a dead body could continue to behave in an inexplicable manner tapped into fears about the unknown. Could the forces of nature truly be so unpredictable? Could death itself be a door to something beyond human comprehension? As the case continued to haunt the city of Edinburgh, it became a legend, a story that transcended the realm of scientific inquiry and entered the realm of folklore. The mysterious cadaver was no longer simply a subject for dissection. It had become part of the city's cultural mythology. It was discussed in hushed tones, with some seeing it as a sign of divine intervention, and others as a warning of the limits of human knowledge. The body's unexplained swelling, far from diminishing in significance, only grew as it became woven into the fabric of the city's collective consciousness. In the end, the mystery of the expanding cadaver remained unsolved, but it continued to serve as a reminder of the complex relationship between life and death, science and superstition, the known and the unknown. It is a story that lingers in the shadows of history, a testament to the enduring power of the mysteries that lie just beyond our reach. And even as modern science has advanced, the tale of the cadaver that continued to gain weight after death remains a fascinating and unsettling chapter in the history of medicine, a chapter that reminds us that even in a world where science reigns supreme, there will always be things that elude our understanding. The case of the cadaver that continued to gain weight after death became more than just a medical anomaly. It evolved into a chilling symbol of the mysteries that still surrounded the human body. For those in the medical field who had been studying the phenomenon closely, the mystery was both maddening and fascinating. The body, despite having undergone the expected initial stages of decomposition, seemed to continue defying the natural processes of decay. Its rapid weight gain, unchecked by the typical breakdown of cells and tissues, forced medical professionals to reconsider everything they knew about death. The body's abnormal transformation wasn't just a curiosity. It represented a boundary that science, at that time, couldn't cross. As they stood before the cadaver, the doctors found themselves staring at the precipice of the unknown. What was particularly troubling to the scientific community was the idea that the body's continued weight gain wasn't simply due to the accumulation of gases during putrefaction. While post-mortem swelling due to bacterial activity was well understood, the case in Edinburgh seemed to suggest something beyond the usual mechanisms of decomposition. The process of autolysis, the breakdown of cells through the body's own enzymes, and the subsequent bacterial invasion that would typically lead to putrefaction had not progressed in the expected manner. Instead of following a gradual course, the weight gain appeared to be happening at an alarming rate, and its distribution seemed to affect the entire body, not just the internal organs. As the body swelled, it was almost as if it were alive again, a grotesque mimicry of vitality. The skin stretched over the bloating flesh, and the body's features, once familiar and human, became distorted and foreign. This unnerving spectacle pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in both medical and social contexts. There was something inherently disturbing about the notion that death, the final boundary of life, could somehow be disrupted. The body was supposed to decompose, to break down into the elements from which it was made. But this body was not following those rules, and no matter how much the doctors observed and analyzed, the cause behind this anomaly was never fully understood. The fact that the weight gain did not appear to follow the typical patterns of decay left medical experts scrambling for answers. Was this phenomenon indicative of a disease or infection previously unknown to science? Perhaps the cadaver was still harboring some kind of infection that was somehow sustaining it post-mortem, though this theory seemed increasingly unlikely as they failed to find signs of infection. The suggestion that there was some kind of external force acting upon the body, be it an environmental influence or a yet-to-be-discovered biochemical process, was also explored but did not offer a satisfactory explanation either.